Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to another Burlingame It's a Small Town podcast, sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. This is Mark Lucchese, also known as Mark at the Mic, and before I introduce my guest today, I would like to thank Christine Krolik, the current mayor of the city of Hillsborough, for creating this opportunity for me. My guest today is well known locally and nationally. She is the author of Undaunted and also is the founder of the Jackie Speier Foundation. Welcome, Jackie Speier. So, Jackie, you've done a great job in the various elected offices you've held. And this is going to be sort of a three-point question to you. Can you tell us how you gave thought to a career in politics? Did it begin at Mercy High here in Burlingame? And would you mind telling our listeners your path in government, starting with the San Mateo County supervisors?
So, in fact, it did start at Mercy High School. I worked on my very first political campaign when I was 16. It was for then Assemblyman Leo Ryan. And I am one of those people that believes there's a plan for each of us. We're not necessarily privy to the plan, but there was a plan. I actually had received the mail one day from my family, and I saw something from Leo Ryan. It was a solicitation letter. And so I filled out the card in the letter and said, I have no money, but I'm a high school student interested in politics. So that's how it began. I got a phone call. I went to the interview. I rue, in some respects, that experience because I was being evaluated as to whether or not I would be eligible to be a Ryan girl. And it was 1966. And Beatlemania was crazy, so there was a Bill Hagen out of San Bruno had a dress shop, and all the outfits came from that dress shop, and they were go-go girls. I mean, we had white boots and black tights and mini skirts and, the little bobby hats and black turtleneck sweaters, and we went around the county campaigning for Leo Ryan. So that's where I got my start.
And then what about after Mercy? You went on to UC Davis, is that correct?
So then I go on to UC Davis. And again, a plan, not privy to it, but it's all there. Assemblyman Ryan came to campus to speak to a seminar class. He turned to one of the students next to him and said, do you know Jackie Speier? She said, oh yeah, she's in my dorm. Well, our dorm was maybe 35 women out of 12,000 on the campus, right? What were the chances? Mm-hmm. Can you find her? She goes to the library. I'm studying in the library that night. I never studied in the library. She says, Assemblyman Ryan's here. He wants to see you. So I come to the seminar. We then all go out afterwards and have coffee or beer or wherever. I guess I didn't have beer because I wasn't old enough yet. But he says, well, what are you studying? And I said, political science. And he said, you're not going to learn anything about political science in the classroom. You need to come to Sacramento. And so I started as an intern. And from there, a lot of it's history.
Well, how did it come about to be San Mateo County supervisor? Then you progressed.
So, Congressman Ryan is assassinated in November 1978. I was badly wounded in that travesty, and I was hospitalized for over 2 months. The weekend, I come home with U.S. Marshal protection because there had been death threats. I'm sitting at home. My arm is still in a sling. I didn't have a radial nerve. My leg is still regenerating. I mean, it was still somewhat raw. It still needed dressing. And I thought to myself, am I going to be a victim of Guyana the rest of my life? Or am I going to choose something different? So I come home on a Friday night to friends and family. The nuns from Mercy were there. It was a full weekend. People were coming in and interviewing. For the first time, I wasn't feeling pain, even though I was in pain because I was other-directed. So that Monday morning, I decided I was going to run for his unexpired term. It was the last day that you could take out papers to run for that seat.
Man, that's cutting it close, huh?
And there were already 11 candidates in the race. So I go down, my hand's in this contraption. I can't use my right hand. I signed the papers. I start running. It was a 6-week campaign. I lost. I came in third among the Democrats. It was, just this incredible experience. But I lost. And I raised $20,000 and had $7,000 left. It was a campaign put together with baling wire and gum.
Yeah.
But it taught me a lot.
Yeah, you bounced back, though. You didn't just fall apart.
So
you got back up.
The following year, I decided I'm going to run for the Board of Supervisors. And I was going to run in a seat that was on the coast. But people kept pushing me, oh, no, you should run against Jim Fitzgerald. Well, Jim Fitzgerald had been on the Board of Supervisors for 20 years. And I thought, I don't know that I can really take this on. But I did. And I won it. So...
yeah.
That's how it started.
Then from there, did it go to state assembly? Was it state assembly?
6 years later, I ran for the state assembly.
Yeah.
Lou Pappen had decided to run for Senator Ferrand's seat because Senator Ferrand was retiring. So he was in a battle between Quentin Kopp and himself. Quentin Kopp wins that race, but he had vacated the assembly seat. I ran for the assembly seat. It was the assembly seat that Leo Ryan had when I first got involved legislatively. And I got, it was a bloody battle because I was not the chosen candidate. Mm-hmm. Willie Brown was supporting Mike Nevin, who was the brother-in-law of a seated member of the state assembly, Pat Johnson. Yeah. And they thought that I was too much of a renegade. And so they dumped all the money they could into that race. They sent buses of staffers from Sacramento down to Rock precincts. Willie Brown said to all of the third House members, you can't support her. And the only organization that ended up supporting me was the California Medical Association, ironically. Everyone else stayed away. I won that race. That's how it progressed. And then I was there in the state assembly for 10 years. I was term limited out, left and worked for Electronic Arts and the organization now known as Ability Path. It was then called Popular Care. It was providing services to the developmentally disabled. And then 2 years later ran for the state senate and got elected and served there 8 years. Ran for lieutenant governor of California in 2006 and lost. So I love to tell young people this is what a 3-time loser looks like.
Yeah.
I lost for student body president in high school. I lost the first time I ran for Congress, and I lost for lieutenant governor.
But it certainly didn't deter you. You kept going.
Well, what you learn in these experiences is when one door closes, another window opens.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a title of one of your chapters.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. How many years in Congress altogether?
Almost 15.
Yeah. Boy, amazing career. Thank you for that. So are there certain bills, projects, or undertakings that you initiated or worked on that you are certainly most proud of?
Well, in the state legislature, I had 300 bills signed into law. So there's a real library of legislation that I think has really helped people. A lot around issues like financial privacy, child support enforcement, reproductive health, consumer protection. Those were the areas that I spent most of my time on. In Congress, it's a very different animal. You introduce a bill and it goes to the dead letter file because nothing passes unless it's in an omnibus bill or if it's the chairperson's bill. So I kind of measure my success in Congress by the number of amendments I got into the National Defense Authorization Act, because that typically is a bill that is passed every year in Congress, no matter what. And a lot of work I did in that committee was as chair of the Military Personnel Subcommittee. So I worked a lot with our service members. Sexual assault in the military was a huge issue. The suicide rate, particularly in Alaska, which is remote and isolating. We've had just a spike in suicide. So a lot of programs and resources put to that. Extremism in the military, which became more of an issue, certainly after the January 6th insurrection, when we saw so many either military or former military that were engaged. And then work around reproductive health, the Equal Rights Amendment there.
What about, and I can't remember if it was in the state or if it was Congress, assault rifle, sorry.
AR-15s,
right.
Assault weapons.
Yes.
So that was I was very engaged in gun violence reform in Congress, but very frustrated because nothing ever got done. In the state legislature, I was what's called the jockey on the assembly floor. It was a bill by David Roberti to extend the assault weapon ban. And I was asked to carry it on the assembly floor. And I was introducing the bill, and you can raise your mic if you want to be recognized. And he asked, will the gentlelady yield? And I said, yes, I'll yield. He says, I have a question for you, Ms. Speier. Have you ever shot an assault weapon? Have you ever shot an assault weapon? That's what he said twice. And I stood there and said, if this man is stupid enough to ask me this question, I'm going to give it to him. And so I said, no, I have not. But let me ask you a question. Have you ever been shot by an assault weapon? And the place went still. You could hear a pin drop. He sat down. The bill flew out of committee. Flew off the floor. And then Governor Pete Wilson signed it into law.
Yeah.
Now,
I
how
personally,
have things changed?
I personally can't believe that guy actually asked you that question. I read that in the book. Are you kidding me? Mm-hmm. So, boy, okay, thank you.
He was a former sheriff in the Sacramento area.
Oh,
and
boy.
Thought he,
enough
had
said.
it all together.
Got it. Enough said about that. So how has Congress changed during the time that you were there?
I would say that it started before I got there. Newt Gingrich really changed the House of Representatives into an institution that was one of political battles and harshness and acrimony. And his imprimatur on the institution has changed it for the foreseeable future. It's gotten worse as the years have gone by. So the advent of social media made it even more toxic. Mm-hmm. And so you have members on the House floor that will say things, or in committee, they will say things for one purpose: to be able to take that video, put it on their Twitter page or on their campaign website, and fundraise off of it. And so people say the most extreme, asinine things, and they do it for one purpose: to just gin up the base and to fundraise off of it. So it's become a very difficult environment in which to get much done. But the good news is, I think that we'll see that change as a new generation comes on board. I think social media will always have an impact, but I do think when you look at young people today, they have grown up doing these survival drills. They've grown up in high school and elementary school campuses where they have seen these horrific massacres take place. So they come to this not as someone who is paying homage to the National Rifle Association, but someone who has personally encountered the experience. So I do think things are going to change.
I hope so, yeah. So serving, and we talked about this off mic when you first got here, serving in Washington must have been an exhausting job for you. Probably home on weekends, correct? And Monday through Friday at work in Washington. Is there anything you really miss?
I miss the opportunity to force people to look at issues they don't want to look at on a national scale. Sexual assault in the military is a great example. It had been swept under the proverbial rug for decades. 30,000 service members sexually assaulted every year. Most of them were men early on. Now that number has changed. It's more women than men now. But to have that experience and be so scarred by it and have so few of them reported for fear of retaliation was something that I felt had to be dealt with. And I didn't even have the support of my Democratic colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Committee, or Armed Services Committee, I should say, when I first brought it up. But over time, I was able to build the case for taking these cases out of the chain of command and creating a separate office, all of which is now taking place. But it took the gruesome murder of Vanessa Guillen, a young private at Fort Hood, who was bludgeoned to death in the arms room by a fellow service member. She was put into a tough box, carted off to a remote area. Her body parts were dismembered, and she was buried in different locations. That was such a horrific story that everyone recognized that something had to be done. She had been sexually harassed.
What year was that?
It was 2020, I believe.
Boy, that's incredible.
2019 or 2020.
Okay, is there anything that you don't miss?
I don't miss the travel.
Yeah.
I don't miss the disappointment that invariably happened when you would get a bill passed in the House and it would either get watered down or never taken up on the Senate side. That happened with the Equal Rights Amendment 3 or 4 times to me.
Yeah.
And it becomes this just tough attack that you just have to pick yourself up and realize you just got to keep pushing.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Kevin Mullen, your successor, Sarah grad and a South City native. And I have to plug my wife. She taught him in 7th or 8th grade at St. Veronica's. Do you mentor him much?
Well, I like to think I have. He came onto my staff when I was in the state assembly as a caseworker. I then made him my district director when I was in the state senate and supported him in his bids for city council and state assembly. Worked with him closely because he's in Washington now. And it's been 3 months. We've sat down a couple of times and talked.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, everybody needs a mentor, I think, right?
Well, I mean, only if he wants it. I'm not going to, super impose myself on him. But when he wants, my
Great.
input, I'm happy to give it.
Great. This one came from one of my constituents, this question here, because I don't think I would have ever thought about it. But do you believe in cognitive testing, or do you believe cognitive testing has a place in Washington for elected officials?
It's an interesting question because we have had a number of members who have suffered from strokes, who come back with limitations in their ability. The question is, who has that right? Is that something that Congress has the right to impose? Or is it really, if we are a representative democracy, isn't it the people in one's district that make the determination whether or not someone is fit to serve? So I think for the presidency, there might be some value in having some kind of an evaluation. I mean, they certainly go through a physical evaluation, but having served with the congressman who was the surgeon or he wasn't a surgeon, but he was an admiral. He was the president's physician. I certainly wouldn't go to him for any health reasons. So I don't know. I worry a little bit about, there's an interest. These are service members who are working at Walter Reed. Their commander-in-chief is the president of the United States. I think they're loath to somehow recommend that they're not fit.
Well, thank you for that. Do you have an opinion on the Dianne Feinstein controversy?
Dianne Feinstein has an extraordinary legacy. She has served admirably. She has now, at 89, been impacted by shingles, which, as you age, has a more profound effect on you. So her recovery is slower. She has now made the decision to step aside so that someone else can replace her on the Judiciary Committee. And I think it's important to appreciate the fact that the focus is on Dianne Feinstein, not just here in California, but elsewhere. And she's a woman. When Senator Kirk from Illinois had a stroke, he was out for a full year. Senator Johnson from, I believe it was South Dakota, again, out for 8 months. I think the Senate recognizes that as people age, they're going to have infirmities. They need to be respectful of that and respect the decision of the individual as to when it's time to either retire or resign.
And she wants to finish her term, is that correct?
I believe that's her intention.
Yeah.
And I think in consultation with her physician, she will make the decision that's right this year.
Yeah, boy. Okay, before we move into the your foundation, I just want to ask you, your decision to retire, how'd you come about that? What made that happen?
So when I first ran for Congress, I said to my husband, I'll probably want to do this until I'm 70. Well, then 70 came, and I was working on sexual assault in the military. I was chair of the subcommittee. I was feeling that we were at a point where we could really finally address this issue. And I said, I need another 2 years. And so my husband, Barry, said, okay. Well, then 2 years came, and I thought, well, maybe he'll give me another pass. But he didn't, and I made a promise. And so it was important to keep that promise. He wants us to spend more time together, not just as a weekend spouse. And there's a time to pass the baton. And while I wasn't absolutely ready to do so, I recognized that it was close enough that I was going to do that.
Wonderful.
But I must also say that it hasn't stopped my commitment to the people I've represented for 40 years. Yeah. And I'm thrilled to be home, and I'm now working on their behalf on another.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that, the foundation. Yeah. Thank you for those comments about your time in government. I really appreciate it. The Jackie Speier Foundation, right?
Right.
I have a few questions in here, but why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners a little bit about your foundation and what led you to the decision to have a foundation?
So late last year, I started researching kind of the fundamental needs here in the county. And in conjunction with former staff members who had worked with me, we were made aware of something that was stunning in its impact. There are 27,000 children living in poverty in San Mateo County. We are the richest county in the state, the fourth richest county in the country. We have 22 billionaires that live here. We have 5,000 people who average $4.1 million a year in income. And we have 2 out of every 5 kids going to bed hungry. I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to rid San Mateo County of childhood poverty. So the foundation was formed. I seeded it with $1 million from my campaign fund. I'm now in the phase of raising money for it. And I want us to realize that people who are our next door neighbors could truly be living in poverty and we not know it. I spent a couple of years ago, a night at the homeless shelter on Maple Street in Redwood City. And the first people I met there were a couple. She was working in the bakery at Safeway. He was working at Office Depot warehouse. I'm thinking to myself, the person that hands you a loaf of bread at Safeway, you don't think of them as being homeless.
Not at all.
Another man at that night who was kind of restless and looking at me kind of leerily, finally around 1 a.m. wanted to sit down and talk to me. And he had just gotten out of the rehab program at the Veterans facility for drug rehab in Menlo Park. He says to me, you know, I was making 6 figures at Oracle. I had this downward spiral into drugs. And then he looked me in the eye and he said, you have no idea what my country asked me to do in Iraq. So this is our homeless. Yeah. Now, I'll tell you a more recent story because I'm doing a listening tour right now. I met with 2 mothers. They are born in San Mateo, raised here. One mother just left an abusive husband after 14 years. She has 3 boys. She is a child care provider in South San Francisco from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. At 5:30, she goes to a retail job from 5 until 10. She is living in Life Moves housing right now, but that's coming to an end. She goes to San Bruno to rent a 1-bedroom apartment for $2,500, and the landlord says, I'm not going to rent to you because you have 3 children.
Boy. Jeez.
Another mother, born in San Mateo, raised here. These are women whose husbands either were violent or who just left. And this mother, 2 children, she works at a company in Foster City. She works in the Bon Appetit in the morning from 6 to 3, providing food. And she comes back in the evening at 10 o'clock and works from 10 until 6 a.m. in security.
Unbelievable. It's just
And both these women are not eligible for federal programs because they make too much money. But the federal poverty level is a family of 4 living on $30,000 a year.
Not going to happen.
And it's a formula that was created in 1960 by a nutritionist, interestingly enough, who based it on what the cost of food is. And then she just multiplied it by 3. Well, the cost of housing and childcare today are what eats up a family's budget. So the formula is just totally out of sync. And then you've got all these restrictions placed on you when you use food stamps, for instance, because you can't, for instance, buy diapers. Diapers are an expensive cost, but you've got to find that and pay for that through some other means.
So you brought up food stamps, and one of my questions later on, I'm going to bring it up now then.
Okay.
You actually lived on food stamps for a week to see what it was like?
It's called the Food Stamp Challenge.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it again this year, and I'm going to invite all of the people that are interested and the electeds to participate in it. And it means that you have to live on $5 a day.
So a book of food stamps or the EBT card, what is it? I mean, there's only X amount of dollars loaded on that thing. Is that correct?
That's correct. So $5 a day. Think about it. Do you know where I did my shopping?
I can tell you where you didn't do it, but
yeah, we didn't do it at Molly Stone's. The Dollar Tree.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, there was no Starbucks coffee in my diet. I was drinking instant coffee.
Boy.
I had cans of tuna. I had, I think, 1 head of lettuce, a couple tomatoes, an apple or 2 for the week. And what I experienced was I thought about food all the time. I would sit in a committee hearing, and all I was thinking about was food. When I went to bed at night, I felt like I had a brick in my stomach.
Horrible.
Now, how can we allow 2 out of every 5 kids in this county to go to bed hungry? I had a mother tell me that she rubs her child's tummy at night to try and get the child to fall asleep.
Boy. Thank you for sharing that food stamp experience.
Why don't you try it, Mark?
I put on the pandemic 15, then it went to the pandemic 20, so I just might, okay? Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm going to quote one of the lines in your foundation that I took off your website, because there's a couple of questions I have about that. It says, the Jackie Speier Foundation for Women and Children will address poverty, lack of housing and childcare, and domestic violence with direct grants and through an innovation incubator to support ingenious solutions to the feminization of poverty. Can you explain to us
what that means?
Yeah.
Well, let's start with feminization of poverty.
Yeah, that was in your book a bit, I think. Yeah.
So I actually did a hearing on the feminization of poverty when I was on the Board of Supervisors. And what came out of that hearing was that when women got divorced, their standard of living dropped dramatically by 60%, if I remember the figures correctly. The spouses, the ex-husbands, actually went up some 30%. And one of the things we found out was that child support orders, court orders for child support, were not being responded to. They weren't being followed. So when I went to the legislature, I started carrying legislation to make them more accountable. For instance, if you have a license in California, professional license, and you don't pay your child support, we'll take your license away from you. When that bill got passed and signed into law, the very first person that got impacted by it was a physician in San Diego who owed $100,000 in child support. And it wasn't until he was about to lose his license that he decided he would come up with a plan for repayment.
For paying back.
Not that it has to be paid back immediately, but over a course of time.
Unreal.
We also went after income tax refunds. So if you were getting a refund, there would be an intercept if you owed child support. Because in the end, when you don't pay your child support, that family, that mother and child or children, ends up going on a federal program, right?
Relief, yeah.
And so the taxpayers are picking up the tab for your irresponsibility. Yeah. So that, I thought, was going to fix a lot of it. And so there was a lot that was done in that regard to make people more accountable for child support. But you know what happens in the end? A mother is afraid to ask for an increase in her child support, or she won't ask for the child support because she really wants the father to see the child. And so decisions are made not to rock the boat. And yet what happens is the child is impacted dramatically. One of the things we're looking at is what's called guaranteed income. And there's a study that NIH did, National Institute of Health, where they took 1,000 families with children that were 0 to 1. To half of the population, so about 500 of them, they gave $333 a month. To the other half of the population, they gave $30 a month. And at the end of year one, they looked at the brain wave activity in the brains of these 1-year-olds. And the children, the families that were receiving the $333 a month, the brainwave activity was much higher. So we know 0 to 2, critical period of time for child's development. So I'm kind of focusing personally on what are we going to do for that universe of families. We'll see where that takes us. Now, the incubator idea is to take, this is the hotbed of innovation in this region, right?
Yep, sure is.
If there are great ideas that haven't been tried before, we're going to have this foundation look at those opportunities and support them.
Yeah.
I think that there was a 20% increase in domestic violence last year. 20% increase.
Hard for me to believe these things sometimes when I hear that.
This is data. This is all documented in the report.
I'm sure it is. It's just I live in protected Burlingame. You know
That's
what I mean?
right.
You never hear about my name. The things that go on.
That's exactly right. I think that we have to open our eyes, and we are a good and generous community, and I think we can fix this. So I've called this our local moonshot.
Yep.
And I've called this the most important campaign of my life.
That's terrific.
So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of more questions if you don't mind. I have another thing I think I took off the website. The foundation will award $1 million grants on a yearly basis to individuals, teams, and nonprofits who develop ingenious solutions to the problems of the last 4 decades. What does all that mean? Break it down for me.
That means once we raise enough money,
Yep.
We'll be able to look at new ways of helping people lift themselves out of poverty. I don't presume to have all the answers. One of the things we are going to do this year is we're going to have a summit on childhood poverty in San Mateo County. We're going to bring in the electeds, the school board members, city council members, county reps, elected members of Congress, and we're all going to have experts talk to us. There's, these guaranteed income programs have been started now around the country. There are about 100 of them. Stanford is evaluating them. Are we better served by giving people money and letting them decide how they're going to spend it? I mean, you can put some restrictions, no alcohol, but they know that they have to fix their car this month, or else they're not going to have transportation to get to work. So that is the intent, is to be able to, let's look at the war on poverty started in the 60s, but we're still dealing with the 15 to 20% in our country in poverty. In many of the European countries, if you have a child, you're getting a stipend every month for that child until they turn 18, because they value family, they value children. We don't do that. When I was a single mom, when my first husband was killed in an automobile accident, you know what my lifeline was? It was Social Security benefits, the dependent benefits that go to families where there has been the death of a spouse and they have children under the age of 18. That was my lifeline.
Unreal. That's, what can you say, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Can you maybe tell us how the money will trickle down to a single mom and her family? How does that, and how do you decide who's going to qualify for that? How does that come about?
Good question. I think that the answer to that is still to be determined. But we do know, for instance, and I was just on a Zoom call with the county, we know that there are 300 to 400 moms pregnant in Medi-Cal. So do you start there? Now, that's not going to help the mom that was born in San Mateo who's now doing 2 jobs. How do you meet her needs? Some of these are going to have to, we need to find ways to identify people who are in need and help them.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we're going to do that.
Right.
But I can tell you that some of the systems we've created aren't working. The eviction issue. Matthew Desmond wrote his first book called Evicted. And his point there was that's where it all ends. That's where poverty spirals out of control. Once you're evicted, you fall into that downward spiral in poverty. You're first living in your car, then you're in a homeless shelter, and then you're desperate. If you can keep people in their homes, put wraparound services there to help them be more financially literate, or provide the extra childcare, whatever it is. In his eviction lab, he saw that when they provided these wraparound services, 5 years later, these families were still living in their homes. We have an opportunity to help people who are evicted right now. You know what? They can't respond to the need. There's no I just found out there's no ability to go into an office and talk to someone. It's all on Zoom. There's over 1,000 cases. You've got legal aid provided. They're not going to provide what's needed. So, my question is, maybe we need to have the San Mateo Bar Association step up and have attorneys commit to doing, X number of cases a month.
Yeah, and with all these women that are in poverty, we probably don't have enough people to help them. You know what I mean? There's not enough social service people to help.
Or they aren't eligible because they're working 2 jobs.
That kills me. Is this foundation something you wanted to do while you were in Congress, but the opportunity or time didn't present itself?
No, I had no idea until I knew I wanted to take this campaign money and have it go to a good purpose. And so then that just started me thinking. And then we did the research. And so it's evolved over the last 6 months into what it is today.
Yeah. Terrific. Okay, so here's a question from one of my colleagues again. There is a tremendous amount of wealth in this area, we know that, along with many giving people. However, many in the tech industries think globally rather than locally. Is the foundation going to try and shift that a little bit?
That question is right on, and I wish that I had actually suggested that question to you, because 91% of the giving by those 22 billionaires and those 5,000 people making $4.1 million a year, 91% goes either nationally or internationally. Mm-hmm. And I think it's only because they don't know that the need is so great right here at home. So part of my message is that charity starts at home, and we've got to do a better job of identifying what the needs are and helping them decide where to put it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I heard this recently, and I can't believe it, so I'm going to let you validate it for me if you would. Is it true that two schools in the same city in San Mateo County, they didn't have enough drinking water for students or teachers? Is that any
so
kind of...
it is true. It's Pescadero. They have been operating in that school district, the middle school and the high school, with bottled water for decades. And it has everything to do with the fertilizer and sprays that are used, and it leaches into the water, and it has, created drinking water that is undrinkable. So there is a plan, though, that is in the process I think it's 2025. They're relocating the fire station there, and they're going to pipe in the water so that the school by 2025 will have clean drinking water.
Thank goodness.
But the nitrates are a serious problem. So for many, many years, the farm workers have been drinking water with nitrates in them. I mean, so cancers, birth defects, births that are stillborn, all of those are impacted by having that in the drinking water.
Has this been something that's been readily known for years, or has it been kind of kept? Because I had never heard that before. I had friends that lived in Pescadero, grew up there.
So it's been known for some years. That's part of the problem. Things move so slowly.
Yeah.
So you've got to go through all the environmental reviews. You've got to get the funding. It's a major undertaking. It was going to be done in 2022. It's now been postponed to 2024 or 2025. But it also raises a really important question that we have, I think, in a painful way, realized. Another area of hidden in plain sight were these farms run by mega companies that were treating their workers like, I won't use the word that I want to use, but and they were loath to say anything because many of them, half of them are undocumented, mm-hmm. and they want the money because they want to be able to send it home.
Did a lot of this get exposed during the recent murders or shootings?
Yeah. Yes. In fact, the Terra Gardens farm wasn't even known to San Mateo County. The question is, was it even known to the state? Where they, it's a family out of Los Angeles that owns the farms, the mushroom farms, and I still haven't had it. That's one of the frustrations of not being in office. You can't get an answer to your question as easily because you're just, the average citizen. But I want to know what the state knew and didn't do. I want to know if they didn't file as a corporation, which you're required to do, and pay your $800. If they didn't even do that, and the fine is so little that it was the cost of doing business, so they didn't care.
Right. It just moves
on. So no one knew about it.
Amazing. Okay, I'm going to keep you for a couple of more minutes.
Okay.
How can interested donors find out more about this much-needed undertaking? How can they find out more about your foundation?
So Jackie Speier Foundation will take you to the Philanthropic Ventures Foundation website and my particular page, and all your all your contributions are tax deductible, unlike campaign contributions. So there's a great benefit. And, the intention is to have this, we're going to keep the operation very lean, so that the money is going to go to families.
Right, you're not going to be administration heavy, in other words,
not
right?
at all. Right now, there's no administration.
Yeah.
Right now, people are volunteering their time to help me.
And that was the next question. So I had here, as well as donating to the foundation, how can San Mateo County residents get involved? Volunteering?
They can go to info Jackie Speier Foundation.
Is there a particular office that you have right now?
No. I'm running it out of my house.
Wow.
And we're doing Zoom calls. I mean, because you start putting those kind of costs in place,
sure,
you're going to eat up
and
the
then
money.
they grow.
Right.
Grow. Yeah, boy. Anything else you want to offer?
Just the info Jackie Speier Foundation at gmail.com if they want to
and
communicate.
donations have begun?
Yes.
Fantastic. I don't know what to say, Jackie Speier, Congressman Jackie Speier, but I am so excited that you were here today. Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Well, thank you, Mark. My pleasure.
I'd like to thank Congresswoman Jackie Speier and founder of the Jackie Speier Foundation for being my guest today on Burlingame. It's a small town podcast sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. Again, special thanks to Christine Krolik, the current mayor of the city of Hillsborough, for helping in setting up this interview. Kathy and Shelby for editing and producing, the great Ray Tyler for video, and my musical director, Bray. You can hear more of Bray at bray.com. Also, thanks to John Mays, Brad McCulley, and Mike Nagler for their thoughts and ideas. This podcast was recorded on Friday, March 15th, 2023. The Burlingame Historical Society copyrights this recording, and no part can be copied or replayed without the permission of the Burlingame Historical Society. So until next time, everyone, see you around Burlingame. It's a small town.